Why does history matter? What's the point in keeping track of everything that's happened before? How does history influence the present and future? The Network State by Balaji Srinivasan makes the case that history is crucial for several reasons. In part one of this episode, we covered how history is how you win the argument. Winning arguments need more than pure logic alone. You need facts, so you need history. How history determines legality, how history determines morality, how history is how you develop compelling media, how history is the true value of cryptocurrency, how history tells you who's in charge. We also explored how new network states should treat or teach their history and whether on-chain records make it impossible to lie. We also dived into what history tells us about how radical truth, honesty, and transparency would work at scale using examples from companies doing it today. Today, in part two of why history is crucial, we cover history determines your hiring policy. Founders need to know history in order to have the moral authority and maneuverability to make the best decisions. How history is how you debug our broken society. And we're just starting out and could really use your support. So if you could like this episode, please lightly and lovingly caress that like button, share this episode, comment, and sign up for our newsletter. I promise we'll make it worth it for you. All right, welcome everyone to another episode of the Network State Podcast. Today is History as Trajectory from Chapter 2, Why History Matters, Part 2. And we're also going to be doing our first live Twitter space for this one. So for any of you listening live, welcome.
They're basically time travelers.
Exactly, yeah. We're jumping around in all the different metaverses. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. We'll start diving into where we left off last time,
Where did we leave off last time?
We left off with history determines your hiring policies. Over here.
Is that controversial?
It's definitely a controversial opinion, I'm sure. There's going to be lots of different points to say, but here we are, right? How history determines your hiring policy. So why are tech companies being lectured by media corporations on diversity? Is it because those media corporations that are 20 to 30 points whiter than tech companies actually deeply care about this? Or is it because after the 2009 era collapse of print media revenue, media corporations struggled for a business model, found that certain words drove traffic, and then doubled down on that, boosting their stock price and bashing their competitors in the process? After all, if you know a bit more history, you'll know that the New York Times company, which originates so many of these Jeremy ads, Jeremy ads? I don't know if that's how you pronounce it.
Jeremy ads.
Jeremy ads. Is an organization.
Jeremy ads.
Jeremy ads. Okay.
Jeremy ads.
All right. Is an organization where the controlling Ox-Sulzberger family literally profited from slavery, blocked women from being publishers, excluded gays from the newsroom for decades, ran a succession process featuring only 3 cis straight white male cousins, and ended up with a publisher who just happened to be the son of the previous guy. So
it kind of sets up like a joke, just by the way. I love that. Like,
it's a lot.
So outrageous. Also, that name, just that name is a nice liberal, forward-thinking family name.
Yeah, right. That name is comically white. And so to be clear, all of this is said in the Network State book, and there are many links to the sources of why Balaji is mentioning all this stuff. So go ahead and check that out if you're a listener. And so moving on, suppose you're a founder. Once you know this history, and once all your friends and employees and investors know it, and once you know that no purportedly brave establishment media corporation would have ever informed you of it in quite those words, you're outside the matrix. You've mentally freed your organization so long as you aren't running a corporation based on hereditary nepotism, where the current guy running the show inherits the company from his father's 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 father. You're more diverse and democratic than the owners of the New York Times company. You don't need to take lectures from them, from anyone in their employ, or really from anyone in their social circle. which includes all establishment journalists. You now have the moral authority to hire who you need to hire within the confines of the law, as SpaceX, Shopify, Kraken, and others are now doing. And that's how a little knowledge of history restores control over your hiring policy. Okay, so Raf, do you want to start off on this one?
Yeah, I mean, I actually think it is worth going through some of those sources, but I don't want to really open a rabbit hole, except for that what he's setting up here is just saying, I think when he means history determines your hiring policy, this section does feel like it's more about history and media, I guess, determines what's going on. Because basically it's, if you look at the history of media, then you understand that, okay, look, the stories that are being told might not necessarily be the ones that you should be listening to, or vice versa. If you're listening to certain stories, make sure that that they're not putting you in a space where you're, I mean, from a positive point of view, I guess, where you're putting limitations on what you would want to do or what you think needs to happen, needs to be done. So I think that's for me, that's like the positive takeaway. I think it can be quite aggressive. I think bashing on the New York Times or other print journalism, like I don't know. I remember learning that in even in high school in the U.S. In the nice little small town school that I went to. We still paid attention to like jingoism and the forces of journalism sort of pushing countries to war. And how media coverage even 100 years ago wasn't exactly like the best, and it was actually only moments that revealed major crises. I think Watergate scandal, if you think about it, that was still outed by the media, which is kind of cool. But what weren't they picking up? Muck raking much earlier than that. I think at least 50 years earlier than that, maybe even in the previous century, where they were they went to tackle cronyism or I guess just like the disgusting work practices that were happening in industrial America. Those were good forms of journalism, and I'm sure the journalists there actually believed in some kind of moral grounding. I'm not sure who owned them. I'm sure at the time it was still the same owners. So yeah, I think it sort of cycles, and basically for me, the barrier is, let's not let what other people say or think stop you from doing the right thing. And I think that's the real point for me. That's for, ideally, I hope that's the point that they're trying to make.
Absolutely, yeah. And like as we've seen in the US with the polarization of the parties, the diversity of thought, the ability to have diversity of thought is so crucially important. And just being able to express whatever you think, even if it's contradictory to the masses, and especially contradictory to the press or to what the government is saying, is extremely important, right? And so, I think like this is a general point about how journalism has changed in the inception of social media, and how controversy drives revenue as opposed to truth drives revenue. And it's unfortunate, but until we find a different system or a model where truth is valued, and that's the more profitable route, or at least the route that media companies want to take, then we're going to have to deal with this problem, right? And more so because all of these social media companies are creating these echo chambers where you have to try very hard to hear something that is opposing your existing viewpoint, and that makes it really hard. It makes it really hard to form a functioning society, functioning peaceful society.
Right. Well, I mean, I think it's funny because we're talking about, I mean, firstly, we're recording this on Twitter, which is hilarious, but
yeah, well, actually, we
but
should bring that up, right? Because I mean, this is such a pressing part of the conversation.
Yeah, but I think even before that, you would have thought that the pressure that social media has brought by by like offering different points of view, which are basically your point of view, but like extreme points of view are now at the forefront, would have driven more traditional, how do you say, more traditional media outlets to actually double down on the truth, because look, now there actually is a need for it, but it hasn't been that way. And I think print media is an interesting one, but really it should have just, I mean, what I hear more is that cable news has kind of like exploded what journalism was supposed to be, because suddenly you have to generate news 24 hours a day,
Right.
which I guess is similar to social media. And so, I mean, they're both driving for content, not quality at that point. So as soon as you're taking the finger off of quality, truth goes down, accountability goes down, you know, et cetera, et cetera. And then I think the other point, which I'm just going to drop now because it in and of itself is kind of interesting, but not necessarily strictly relevant, which is just that he hasn't mentioned Amazon. He hasn't really mentioned Amazon in the beginning of this. I don't know if he mentions this before. It's a pretty big book in a way, but talk about a big company like tech company whose owner literally owns a media company. I mean, I guess you could make the equivalent. So Jeff Bezos owns the Washington Post, right?
Yep.
And he also owns Amazon. So that, I mean, who's attacking who? You know, there he's come under fire for basically manipulating those kinds of headlines in a company that desperately needs oversight. Because it is that size. So I think, you know, I don't think we should be saying like, oh, look, you know, tech companies are doing great, you know, either. There definitely needs to be another kind of watchdog. Just because media is not doing great doesn't mean that tech is the good guy. But I think it kind of makes sense that the move for Elon Musk, if we want to bring it down to the Twitter conversation, is that, look, here's a guy with different tech companies. And well, instead of going the traditional media route, he chooses to own Twitter, which actually, in a way, I think is just the same move, but with a different business model. Or maybe it has the same business model. I don't know what the business model is anymore for print media. It sounds like it's still advertisement and content curation even, but in a different platform, or much more, I guess, open-ended.
Yeah, I mean, this can go into so many different rabbit holes. So to try to keep it within how media informs hiring policy, or I guess like just freedom of speech and freedom of expression, if you're a founder. So just to like bring it all back, right? The reason that founders need to know history in order to have the moral authority and maneuverability to make the best decisions, not because they're pressured by the public or a woke mob, but because they've thought deeply about what would be best and are right about it, right? So these kinds of decisions can go either way, right? So I've seen many instances where companies have listened and it's gone really well. And I've seen many instances of companies where they have not listened and it's gone very poorly. And so it really comes down to, what do the founders truly believe in themselves? Do they know their audience well enough to stick with their values and ignore the pressures that have nothing to do with what they really want to get done when that's the hardest, right? So if you're getting canceled by the New York Times or by any media outlet, that's where these decisions really matter, because you're either going to break and succumb to whatever they're trying to make you do, or you're going to double down on the values that you have for the network state that you've created, or the startup society that you've created, or the company that you've created. It doesn't matter, because you know that your following believes in those values more so than they believe in the values that these media companies are trying to push onto you. So yeah, I think that's,
I mean,
yeah,
I guess the argument there is, what is the difference between what those media companies are espousing versus what your organization is pushing. And I guess underlying that is, where do you draw the moral or ethical code? I assume, I mean, I think that's what we're mostly talking about here. Because I think maybe hiring policy is a veiled term to reveal sort of like touch on the point where it's like, you're making choices about power dynamics, you're making choices about who wins, who doesn't, who gets the job, who doesn't, which groups are you then enriching or pushing forward in that kind of, because you have that opportunity, and that should be weighted according to some kind of moral scale, which I mean, firstly is accountable, like it should have a like legitimate recourse to justice, I guess. I don't know if media is rarely the place where you're going to get treated justly. I think that's true for both sides, both whether you're liberal or conservative, if we want to bring in the political conversation.
Yeah.
And so I mean, I guess on some level you could ignore media. Obviously, media is out there because on top of being profit motivated, all these organizations are, they are also literally a branch which is amplifying thinking into speech. So yeah, I guess there you have to be careful, because if the speech is not aligned with certain moral codes, then yeah, you're going to have worse than discourse. You're going to have discord or whatever.
Nice. So yeah, I mean, how to wrap this up for founders and the decision making behind this, I think it would be good to look at some examples, right? So I think Elon is actually a great example of this, because it happened for both Twitter and Tesla, and probably SpaceX, where during COVID, there was a lot of controversy with Tesla and how many people they fired and the kind of policies they put in place. And you had to come into the office to do X, Y, Z and these kinds of things. And a lot of people got fired, and a lot of people left because of that. And so, but at the same time, a lot of people stayed, right? So it really comes down to this one piece of the definition of a network state, which is having this collective action. And in order to maintain that collective action, which is what makes a startup society so much more powerful than just an average startup, you need to have everybody's values aligned. And everybody's actions need to be compounded by the fact that everybody is aligned. So if there is dissent, or if there is mutiny, or if there is constant debate, which is healthy, I think, to come to the best answer. But after you've come to the correct answer, or the answer that everybody agrees on, everybody has to commit and move forward with that. If after it's been the decision has been made, that continues to happen, it's going to slow down the progress of that startup society, and it's going to make it possible for people who are not aligned to remain in the company. And that's when these kinds of splits can happen, right? Same kind of thing happened with Bitcoin in the early days. And these ideological differences, if they become great enough, cause a split. And again, this is not a bad thing for the world at large. But if you are the founder, it's bad for what you're trying to do, because you just lost a ton of people who could have been helping your mission, right? Mm-hmm. So that's the balance to strike. And with Twitter, we saw the same thing happen. Bunch of people got fired and then asked to come back, and then fired and then asked to come back, like a lot of different back and forth there. So I think it also matters to be careful when making these decisions, be thoughtful about it, really think deeply. Speed is definitely an advantage for startups, no doubt about it. But alienating your own audience or employees or members of your network state just because you're trying to do it quickly is not a good idea. That's not worth it.
Yeah, and I think I would close this subject on that, because I think actually it's a good transition into the next point. But for me, it's like when I work with different startups or with different projects, and the objective is grow your audience, grow your community. Your first audience and your first community are your team, your employees. So if you're not like carrying them along, if you're not building them up the way that you would want to be built, then you're not going to get the response from the market that will be true and consistent and a trustworthy like metric of how you're actually performing. And so if the culture inside is good, then you should not have to worry about being attacked from the outside. That's the thing. Those are lasting organizations.
I agree completely. Yeah. Whatever happens within the doors of the company, if people are all aligned there, that's all that matters. If you guys keep trucking towards the mission. Okay, so the next point is history is how you debug our broken society. Many billions of dollars are spent on history in the engineering world. We don't think about it that way, though. We call it doing a post-mortem, looking over the log files, maybe running a so-called time travel debugger to get a reproducible bug. And once we find it, we might want to execute an undo, do a git revert, restore from backup, or return to a previously known good configuration. Think about that. Think about what we're saying on a micro scale. Knowing the detailed past of the system allows us to figure out what had gone wrong, and being able to partially rewind the past to progress along a different branch via a git revert empowers us to fix that wrongness. This doesn't mean throwing away everything and returning to the caveman era of a blank Git repository, as per either the caricatured traditionalist who wants to turn back the clock or the anarcho-primitivist who wants to end industrialized civilization. But it does mean rewinding a bit to then move forward along a different path, because progress has both magnitude and direction. All these concepts apply to debugging situations at larger scale than companies like societies or countries. So I think this is like the most interesting point of the entire Why History Matters piece, because, and just to explain for listeners as well, Balaji is using a lot of coding terms here, or engineering terms, to explain how having different versions of your website or of your company or of your progress, and being able to go back and then pick up from a version that was better than where you currently are, is super, super, super important. And we see this all the time in web design as well. But when you apply it to history, it's incredibly important, because say you were able to time travel and go back to certain events that you yourself took that you regretted, or that ended in catastrophic results, and you were able to just pick up to a moment before that happened and switch the path based on what you now know. I mean, the implications are enormous, right? And so although that's not possible, at least for now,
yeah, easier said than done.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. The concept and the idea of that remains the same and is still just as valuable, right? So it's the idea that just because you've gone down a certain path, don't fall into the sunk cost fallacy where you've just invested so much you can't change anymore. The ability to change your mind and move forward from a time where things were working better is extremely valuable for you as an individual, but also as a founder or a country. And to acknowledge, right, like for all the times that we've seen countries do things that were wrong, and then deny, and it hindered their progress until, finally they had to, publicly explain, hey, yes, we are taking blame and we are taking responsibility and ownership of the things that we've done wrong. That allows people to get closure and move on. Without that, it's just this constant conflict and resentment that will linger and hinder progress.
Yeah, I mean, right out of the gate, I only have 2 points for this. Like you said, it's a great way to end. I think it carries quite nicely on from the previous subject in terms of underlying ideas, principles. For me, there's 2 principles, and it comes down to this. The headline's very simple. We are gonna keep making mistakes. The trajectory of history, for me, like speaking personally, but based on the tone, the content, the quality of what he's bringing here, is it's just that we make mistakes like over and over again. That's the truth in it. It's the truth. It's the honest truth of any story in the hero's journey that we covered. For example, hero fails in the beginning. We will keep making mistakes. What is a good story? One who learns from their mistakes, is afforded the forgiveness, and goes forward with that knowledge learned. And so those are the 2 points, is because we're going to keep making mistakes, we have to learn to be more forgiving. Again, yes, should people who have more power and responsibility be held to a higher standard? Definitely. That's just the way that it works. It's truth. If you want to take on more things, you're going to have to deal with more. But at the same time, there should be a path where they're offered forgiveness at their level, and that in general we should just be more cautious. And I think this is the real point for me in this final section, which is it's hard to revert, it's hard to go back. So whatever you're going to decide are the parameters for change or progress, make sure that they're broad enough that they're not going to end up putting you in a position where you get pigeonholed or it's a dead end, because going back from there is going to be really painful. Even in real life, if you take the wrong turn, you hate turning back.
Totally. Yeah,
It's the
because you have to
worst.
admit that you're wrong, right? You have to take ownership and say like, I messed up, or what I did was wrong. And yeah, most people don't like doing that.
So it's not just about making it possible technologically, but it's also about making it like more part of the culture, basically. That's what I want to say.
Yeah. Okay, cool. So to wrap up, we got this final passage here, which just kind of puts a nice bow on everything. And that is, you now see why history is useful. A founder of a mere startup company can arguably scrape by without it, tacitly outsourcing the study of history to those who shape society's laws and morality. But a president of a startup society cannot, because a new society involves moral, social, and legal innovation relative to the old one. And that requires a knowledge of history. So ultimately, this is the big differentiating factor between a startup and a startup society. If you care enough about the mission and what you're trying to make something truly new, right, and achieve a vision of something that is better than anything that came before, you need to know what came before, how that came to be, what was wrong with it, what it could be improved or how it could be improved. And then you need to know how to implement that successfully in your own version.
Yeah, exactly. I would just add that, once you know the history book, you will be able to write a better rule book. And that's it.
Totally.
Simple as that.
Okay, guys, this was a short one. Thanks for listening. Like, subscribe, comment, share, rate the podcast, sign up for our newsletter, and get exclusive perks. We're going to be making some merch, and you'll get some early access to surprises. Till next time.
Please do. Love surprises. Bye.
Yeah. Thanks for listening. In the next episode, we'll cover why history is crucial specifically for startup societies and why it matters. We'll talk about why the president of a startup society needs history while traditional founders can scrape by without it. How a new society involves moral, social, and legal innovation relative to the old one, and why that requires a knowledge of history. History as written to the ledger, as opposed to history as written by the winners. The emergence of a new Leviathan, the network. What is the idea of the One Commandment, a historically founded sociopolitical innovation that draws citizens to a startup society, just as a technologically based commercial innovation attracts customers to a startup company? We'll unpack the difference between a startup society and traditional startups. We'll cover why a startup society has to begin with a moral issue instead of a for-profit technological innovation. How early America's religious colonies succeeded at a higher rate than its for-profit colonies because the former had a purpose, the kinds of compelling pitches startup societies could use for recruitment, why startup society founders are arguing that the culture of their startup society is better than their surrounding culture, how the Arab Spring shows us the power and potential of startup societies, better metrics we can use to track and judge government's success. And we're just starting out and could really use your support. So please smash that like button, share this episode, comment, and sign up for our newsletter. I promise we'll make it worth it.